As San Francisco heads into this offseason, one of the biggest moves they made was moving off their defensive coordinator after they had the 6-11 record. With Nick Sorensen, the hope was that he could return to his similar defense as Robert Saleh had in previous years, or even DeMeco Ryans, and move off a guy like Steve Wilks, whose defense was just a little bit different than what San Francisco wanted out of him. But unlike Saleh or DeMeco Ryans, we saw that Nick Sorensen's defense gave up countless big plays and also struggled to stop the run. Maybe even more importantly than those factors, it looked like the defense didn't swarm to the ball carrier as they did in years past, which was really a strength of this 49ers team. But luckily for San Francisco, they can go back to where it all started with Robert Saleh and bring him back if he accepts their defensive coordinator duties. The caveat here is he does have 3 head coach interviews, one with the Cowboys, one with the Raiders, and one with the Jacksonville Jaguars. But I don't necessarily think he's a sure in for any of these jobs. First, he's a defensive-minded coach, so the question still remains if he can figure out the quarterback position and the offensive side of the ball as a head coach of a team. Another major question GMs and owners ask themselves when hiring a new head coach is what message will this send our fan base? And with Robert Saleh, it's hard to say it's one of hope. He only won 20 of 56 games during his time at New York, and his offense consistently lacked creativity and could never get a spark going even with a player like Aaron Rodgers. So I think it's a pretty real possibility that Robert Saleh could return to San Francisco in a familiar location to become a defensive coordinator, waiting on his next opportunity to become a head coach. Therefore, in this video, I want to dive a little bit deeper into Robert Saleh's defense and how it's changed over the years and what that will offer San Francisco going forward, as well as looking at their other 2 candidates they've interviewed in Townson from the Lions and Brandon Staley, who used to coach the Chargers. But before we get into either of those candidates, I want to dive into the candidate that I'm most excited for in Robert Saleh. Even though I highlighted earlier how Robert Saleh could never get his offense going in New York, the same could not be said about his defense. Since 2021, for instance, under Saleh, the Jets ranked 1st in points per drive, 1st in EPA per play, and 3rd in success rate. One of the biggest changes his defense made over the years was in 2022 when he moved from a cover 3 base coverage look to a cover 4 or quarters look. While cover 3 is a somewhat conservative coverage, you could say cover 4 is even more so. It breaks up the deep part of the field into fourths for your DBs to cover and leaves the underneath somewhat susceptible to short passes. This means the offense has to execute at a high level moving down the field and not just burn you for one big play, or at least that's a philosophy thinking about this. Die by 1,000 cuts rather than one big gash. Alongside this base coverage look, Saleh does a good job of mixing in cover 6, which can look like quarters on one side, but cover 2 on the other, which can potentially fool quarterbacks into making a costly error. On the side where it looks like cover 2, for instance, the quarterback might expect the defense underneath playing man coverage, but if they drop into zone, read the quarterback's eyes, you can see how that could lead to a pick for a player like Mustafa or Green. Meanwhile, if the quarterback is reading the side of the field that looks like quarters coverage, he may expect the DB on the opposite side of the field to go into quarters coverage as well, rather than dropping hard into this flat zone, which once again could lead to an interception. As far as Robert Saleh's defense goes against the run, it's pretty simplistic, as each defensive lineman is responsible for one gap, which allows him to flow up the field in a hurry. The downside to this philosophy, if your defensive line over pursues, it leaves you susceptible to cutbacks as well as quarterbacks running into these wide alleys. Personally, I love Robert Saleh's philosophy when it comes to building a defense. I'd rather see a team lose by 1,000 cuts than just getting torched all game long. His way of coaching is also the perfect way to get the most out of an aggressive defense. You'll see him jumping up and down on the sideline, celebrating with his players, and just basically infusing his energy into the defense. Like me, I think that both John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan are hoping Robert Saleh returns to them, but maybe he gets a head coaching job, so they may have to turn to a guy like Townson. This year, Townson has been working for the Detroit Lions as a defensive passing game coordinator and the defensive back coach. Their philosophy is a lot of man coverage and dime looks. Unlike Saleh, I would say this is a much more aggressive philosophy, as often they just have one safety back there to help across the field. This could result in major plays given up, but it could also result in good plays for your defense. Another factor that has to be considered is Townson has been working around a lot of 3-4 defensive fronts, and it seems like he may be more comfortable with that, unlike San Francisco's 4-3 front. Without talking to Townson directly though, it is hard to say exactly what his philosophy will be as a defensive coordinator. He's worked under a ton of different defensive coordinators, which gives him the flexibility to implement his own system. The one coordinator I don't think San Francisco should hire and probably should just move off of completely is Staley. He's been a part of this team last year, and the defense looked pretty bad. When you look at his history as a defensive coordinator, it's not stellar either. During his last year with the Chargers, for instance, his defense gave up 7.7 yards an attempt, which was bottom 5 across the NFL. Alongside that, he ran a 3-4 defense, once again different than San Francisco's 4-3 that Kyle Shanahan loves to run. So I really think that this entire San Francisco team, John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, and Jed York are hoping they can bring back Robert Saleh for at least a couple years and make another Super Bowl push. And they're not the only ones. I think if San Francisco is able to land a guy like Saleh and pick up a decent special teams coordinator, this team should be in playoff contention. But ultimately, these are just my thoughts on San Francisco's defensive coordinator interview so far, and I'd like to hear your thoughts down below.